This is TWiT.
Tik Tok Hysteria. That's what Mike Masnick calls it at Tech Dirt. And I'm inclined to kind of go along with him. The drumbeat has started. It started with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo saying we're looking at banning TikTok in the United States. It has been banned in other places. It's been banned in India, along with a lot of other Chinese applications. Of course, China does the same thing. Twitter and Facebook and other social media are banned in China. But we have a kind of a different style here in the United States of America. Amazon, remember, sent out that letter saying, last week, stop using TikTok on your company phone. And then they retracted it because it turns out they have a lot of relationships with TikTok. For all we know, they use their Amazon Web Services. Where do you stand on the TikTok war? I'll give you one opposing point of view from Mike Masnick's. Somebody I respect equally, I think is an equally astute observer. Ben Thompson in Stratechery wrote a long article. He's never written a short article that I know of. wrote a long article. He says, this is a prescription I don't come to lightly. Perhaps the most powerful argument against taking any sort of action is that we aren't China, and isn't blocking TikTok something China would do. But if China's on the offensive against Western liberalism, with a lowercase l, not only within its borders but within ours, it's in liberalism's interest to cut off a vector that has taken root precisely because it's so brilliantly engineered to give humans exactly what they want. He says, I would prefer Congress take the lead, but I think Apple and Google should ban TikTok, remove it from the App Store, and make it unusable if it's already installed on a device. So that's the extreme opposite. Mike Masnick says TikTok's never demonstrably done anything wrong. This is xenophobia at its worst. All right, Alex, where do you stand? I'll start with Alex and we'll move around.
So, couple of things. One, the canard that TikTok collects too much information about users is silly. Trump has been talking about this some, and we all know that many social applications are essentially just vacuums for your information. So that doesn't really bother me one way or the other. One thing that does, though, is the opacity of the TikTok algorithm. Now, we all know that TikTok has become very popular because it's an amazingly addictive thing to use because it just feeds you more and more stuff and then you watch it. Without really knowing how that recommendation engine works, we don't really know if they're pushing any particular narrative. We do know that there has been some rules in place on TikTok back in the day that were then exposed and then taken down that didn't show off people that were heavier in size and weren't a certain color and so forth. And so there's always been some issues with how TikTok operates. So if TikTok doesn't want to get banned, talking very publicly about how its algorithm works, I think would be an intelligent thing to do. I'm hesitant to say ban it today, but I'm certainly sympathetic to the arguments that are in favor of it. I'm a little bit less than Ben, but more than Mike. I think is where I land on this one.
And I think for a company like Wells Fargo, which it has, to say you can't use TikTok on your company phone is completely reasonable for a lot of reasons. For one thing, you don't want the teller behind the counter to be sending TikToks. But I think that's reasonable. But whether I don't think there would be any precedent for the United States government to say we are going to prevent a Chinese app from being used. Right, Mike? I don't think we've ever done that.
I don't know if there's a precedent or not. I know that they have been apps banned because they've demonstrated some nefarious activity on the app. Yeah. Right, but I think that so I will take the devil's advocate position, sort of in the more extreme version of Ben. And I think first let's characterize what Ben pointed out, which I think he's right on everything. He points out China's national intelligence law, which means that by law, Chinese law, any Chinese company has to hand over any data they ask for, no questions asked. But I'm not concerned, like Alex, I'm not concerned about the data they're collecting. Yeah, they could figure out where secret bases are. They could harvest it for intelligence. I don't think that's really the real concern. The real concern is what Ben Thompson highlighted, which is that TikTok is an amazing tool of propaganda. Here's an example that Ben trotted out, which is that so we all know that President Trump had a rally that didn't have the turnout he wanted, and we found out later that they initially had 1 million signups for the rally, and then like 6,000 people showed up, something like that. And it turned out that a bunch of TikTok users were doing this grassroots effort to fake signups.
Now TikTok and K-pop stans.
Exactly.
That was a good week.
to what extent? Yes, but to what extent did TikTok, the company, facilitate the algorithmic growth of that movement?
Yeah, because the woman who posted that first on TikTok, that post immediately algorithmically got pushed to the top so that everybody saw it.
Yes.
So that's a little suspicious.
It's not about Trump. It's about a Chinese company influencing American politics, which China has demonstrated, as Ben points out, a strong willingness to do. China tries to censor globally. They try to control dissidents globally. They're increasingly meddling in other countries' activities. And TikTok is the fastest growing social network, if it is a social network. Ben Thompson says it isn't, ever. And so here's another one. He's found evidence that they are censoring Hong Kong protests. Okay, that's sort of in Chinese bailiwick. They've been censoring the Houston Rockets. Okay, they're using TikTok to meddle in the world's perception about China, and this is an increasing trend. So his remedy is that TikTok be spun out into a non-Chinese company that is not beholden to the Chinese or beholden to Chinese law and stuff like that. I would argue with that as well, argue in favor of that as well. But here's the problem, Leo. So some network is going to be the global network that everybody in the world uses. And by banning all foreign social networks, China has made it a matter of law that the only possible global network must be a Chinese social network. It has to be Chinese. Right, so Facebook can never be global because it's banned in China, but TikTok can be global because it's not banned in the United States. And for that reason, I think we should ban it. If China wants TikTok unbanned in the United States, then they can unban Facebook in China.
Should mention the reason TikTok blocks the Houston Rockets is because their general manager had the temerity to tweet in support of Hong Kong protesters, at which point China said, we're going to boycott the NBA, which makes a lot of money in China. NBA's
lots of money,
very big in China. At one point, the NBA said we could lose $400 million due to a Chinese boycott over this single tweet from the GM. But that's really a China problem more than a TikTok problem.
Well, there's the devil's in the details. So, for example, the Chinese government is currently in a tussle with the government of Australia because government of Australia wants to launch an inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus. How did they let it? Did they cover up the spread of it, early days, et cetera, et cetera? And Australia absolutely has a right to do this. Australians died and are still dying from the coronavirus, and they have a right to figure out what happened. And China is basically saying, we're going to boycott Australia. We're going to have sanctions on you if you don't stop investigating. And, TikTok would be a perfect way to sway Australian public opinion against the Australian government and in favor of the Chinese government in this sort of political war. This is the advantage that non-democratic countries like China has over democratic countries like Australia. They sway public opinion. If you sway public opinion in China, it doesn't do you any good because it's a non-democratic country. But in Australia, you can sway public opinion in a way that favors Beijing's policies. And so that should be a concern to everyone.
That's a really interesting point. Hold on just one second and I'll get you. Yeah. That's a really interesting point, a much more subtle point than the one the U.S. government's driving home. The Trump campaign has actually been buying ads on Facebook, urging Facebook members to sign a petition banning TikTok, saying, the ads say, TikTok has been caught red-handed by monitoring what's on your phone's clipboard. This, of course, is because in iOS 14, you see the little pop-up whenever anything looks at your clipboard. So you're in TikTok and you get these pop-ups every time you type a character. TikTok says, yeah, we did that because if there was a URL on your clipboard and you were posting, we wanted you to be able to quickly paste it in. We stopped doing that. It wasn't, by the way, Reddit did the same thing for the same reasons. A lot of different apps did that, including Microsoft's LinkedIn app. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous for this campaign, but they are trying to get people to sign a petition to ban TikTok. I think that's the president ginning up the usual xenophobia rather than an actual fear of TikTok. But I think what you said, though, is very subtle. That's not that TikTok's spying on you. Mike Masnick's funny. He says, well, you got a bunch of crappy IoT devices from China also spying on you. That's the least of the worries. And what is China going to get? if they spy on my TikTok. So Seth, you're the tiebreaker. Got one for and one against.
I'll say this. Anytime that any major government gets involved in banning technology or banning apps, it tends to go awry, 10 years, 15 years down the line. So I'm very hesitant to see something like that for those reasons, simply because it sets a very uncomfortable precedent as to what can and cannot be allowed by a government. But I think that Mike hit on something really clever that hasn't quite been highlighted, which is TikTok itself. I mean, who really cares? The real issue, I think, is that in the way that we have yet to figure out how to manage soft diplomacy in the era of global tech. And we don't really have a good way of dealing with countries, not just China, but say Russia, or Iran or others, that do engage in technology in a way that we don't like. TikTok itself as an issue of controlling the message isn't too different, I think, from Voice of America, on radio. But how are we as a country going to influence other countries and their use of technology? Is it just allowing Facebook and Google and Apple and whomever to go do business wherever they want? Or do we need to be a lot more thoughtful about how, we do interact with the rest of the world? And I think, TikTok, by and large, and how they behave is stuff that we really don't see, any different from coming from any other country. I don't think, if you go searching on what is it, Yandex, Russian's search engine, you're going to find Russian propaganda up at the top. I think that we need to be a lot more thoughtful about how we're going about things. And the U.S., for the past 3.5 years has completely ceded any interest in leading or guiding the rest of the world. And that's where the real problem is.
It's also the case that whenever we're threatened by an authoritarian regime like China, they have advantages against an open nation like ours. And there's always the temptation to say, well, we should be less open so that we can fight against those that would undermine us. That's always the temptation. It's always the wrong way to go, because we preserve our integrity and our authority as a nation by being open and democratic and not doing things like banning TikTok. Even though it presents a problem for us, we'd prefer to go that way than just to fight fire with fire, to become equally autocratic.